Greetings, friends and countrymen. Welcome to Conspiracy Corner News, episode 45. This is Bart Sibrel. Conspiracy Corner News briefly highlights the week's most significant and underreported news events throughout the world, focusing on special preparation for the difficult times ahead for all mankind. You may remember this story if you follow alternate news, and I think it might have been reported in the mainstream media, though, about a week after it happened, which is very unusual, because when I was in news for 2 years, I submitted a story that was 1 day old. It was about a particular well-known journalist coming to town who I interviewed, and because it had happened yesterday rather than today, the story was thrown away. So it's very odd that a story like this would be reported locally 4 days after it happened and nationally 7 days after it happened. Very, very unusual. And as most people subscribing to this and like channels will know, that the mainstream media is in bed with the government and other corrupt officials, and they carry the narrative that they are told to carry. Well, here's the story, and as you can see here, it's from September 20th, 2016. So what is that? About a month and a couple of weeks ago, 6 weeks ago or so. So it says gas leak 30% worse than being widely reported. No one is exactly sure when the pipeline will be completely fixed. Let's read a little bit of the story here. This actually was from, I think, a September 6th event, and here's a little bit summary of what happened. This whole situation keeps getting worse and worse. It seems to be growing by the day. When, very important to note, Colonial Pipeline originally announced the leak, it was reported that a mere 1,000 barrels of gas had leaked, or said another way, approximately 45,000 gallons of gasoline. It was then increased to 250,000 gallons of gasoline, or a more than 500% increase. Now it has reached more than an 800% increase from the original declaration, you could say. Do they actually know how much damage has been done, and do they know how much gas has allegedly leaked out? It says the September 9th, I said the 6th, it's the 9th break, has leaked 6,000 barrels, or approximately 250,000 gallons of gasoline into Shelby County, Alabama. So it's Colonial Pipeline, it's happening in Alabama, and it happened roughly about, 5 or 6 weeks ago, something like that. And it says it's up from the original estimate of 1,000 barrels. It says, the more I dig into this gasoline pipeline leak situation, the worse it gets. As we reported yesterday, the Colonial Pipeline that pumps gasoline from Houston, Texas to southern New York State became damaged, allegedly, on Friday, September 9th, 2016. Major news sources didn't begin reporting this incident until Tuesday, September 13th. And national news services reported it beginning Friday, September 16th, a full week later. So it's actually coming up on happening about 2 months ago, rather than I said 5 or 6 weeks ago. The event itself is about coming up on 2 months old. Again, it wasn't reported locally until 4 days after it happened, and nationally a week later. Now that's very, very unusual. It says somewhere between regional news and national news coverage of a 250,000 gas leak in south central Alabama, the governors of Alabama and Georgia announced there's a state of emergency. The leak is outside Birmingham, Alabama, and the gas would have some area to cover to reach Georgia. So far, this whole situation is beginning to smell funny, and it's not just the gas plumes. Now, this was reported by a colleague here at the Sleuth Journal, and they say it's kind of, suspicious the way this is being reported, but they haven't reported anything else on it other than it sounds a little suspicious. And, of course, here's the pipeline going all the way from Houston up to New England, and or New York, and here's allegedly where the accident took place. Now let's go to something that just happened the other day. This is from October 31st. Gasoline prices soar after There they are a second time. Colonial Pipeline explosion. First it was a leak, allegedly. Now it's an explosion, allegedly. And again in Alabama. Isn't that interesting? We go down here, we'll read a little bit of a paragraph. It says, as we detailed earlier, a massive plume of smoke is filling the skyline. So that's the proof that they've had an explosion. Of course, all they have to do is dump a bunch of fuel on the ground and throw a match on it, and you'll have this huge puff of smoke going up into the sky. And here it is, the map of the pipeline. And as you can see, it's the same pipeline, and the accident is occurring in the same state in about the same area. So this caught my attention. First, it's being reported that this is a very suspicious, event being reported. This reporter says something is not right about this news event being reported 4 days later locally and a week later nationally. It's as if they're preparing a press release for it. And now we have the exact same company having a Colonial Pipeline happening again in Alabama, about 7 weeks later. So something's going on here. If a person is struck by lightning and the same person is struck by lightning 7 weeks later, that's very, very unusual. And most of these pipelines run for years and decades without a problem. And now we have the same state, the same company, lightning striking twice in 7 weeks. And I think something is going on here. Yes, there is a conspiracy. I believe they are sucking off fuel, and they don't want people to know. The governors of Alabama and possibly Georgia are in on it, and what they're doing is they're siphoning off gasoline to fill up their reserves. And I can tell you that I have heard through the grapevine that certain governors are not happy with the way that the federal government is basically not warning the people of an impending national disaster. And they are even concerned that some of their, statewide facilities will be taken over by the federal government against their will during this coming crisis. And because of that, what they have done is they have created these two events, an alleged explosion, an alleged leak by the same company in the same state, to make the excuse for why these, what amount to several million gallons of gasoline suddenly disappear. They disappear through these accidents, you see, when in fact the gasoline is being siphoned off by the National Guard, and it's being used as reserves because they believe an impending national disaster is going to happen, and the federal government is not going to share their reserves with them. Now, you may remember this story I reported from October 7th, right here, that the government is preparing for a meteor storm. And there's a lot of evidence, and again, all of these articles will be linked in the description of this video. But here's, a meteor coming. I think this one is from Russia. Most meteors, from the point of view of the observer, come at about a 45-degree angle. And here's another one. This is from the Arizona meteor coming in, also at about a 45-degree angle. And then here is the alleged plume, because the Arizona meteor came just before sunrise. As the sun rose, someone took this picture. And this is allegedly of the plume of this meteor. Now, how can that be? It's coming at a straight line at 45 degrees, and there's a zigzag pattern. Well, here's a picture, very similar to this one, of a missile track. This is a practice missile launch, and this is the trail the missile leaves. But wait a minute. It looks a lot like this. That's allegedly from a meteor. And then here's another one of a missile track. Everyone acknowledges this is a test missile. This is the track it uses. These missiles are tracking, these test fires, they're tracking allegedly enemy incoming missiles. And so they have to zigzag because they're already going, at a very fast speed, and they have to constantly adjust to allegedly, hit the target, which is also coming in at a fast speed. That's why there's a zigzag pattern. And here again is the Arizona alleged tracking of the meteor, and then here's a missile track. So what has happened here is the military has shot a rocket at the Arizona meteor. Not that it was going to cause any property damage or loss of life. I believe they did it as a test, and that they were testing, tracking down and shooting down meteors because they believe, as the story says at the headline, a meteor storm is coming. The federal government knows about it, and I believe there are actually 2 meteor storms coming, but we can go into that later. I'll link, again, the Planet X article, which tells you why there are 2 meteor storms potentially in our future. And we have to remember that this is what Janet Napolitano said the day that she resigned. She said, a natural disaster, the likes of which the nation has never seen, is likely on its way. The only natural disaster that the United States has never before seen, which could also be predicted years in advance, is something coming from outer space due to the predictable mathematical, geometrical pathways of the planets, constellations, comets, asteroids. All of that can be tracked like clockwork years and years in advance. So it's a natural disaster, and it can also be predicted years in advance, and that's why she knew about it. That's why that was her way of having integrity and warning people about it before she resigned, the day she resigned. She's actually kind of leaking it out. She even implied that her successor would have to deal with this disaster, and that's why she was resigning, so she wouldn't have to deal with it. She said they would need a big bottle of Advil to deal with this natural disaster that was coming, that could be predicted years in advance, and I believe that's only something from outer space, a comet, an asteroid, or a rogue planet, and I will link to a Planet X article as well. Now remember, I wrote this story, Government Prepares for Meteor Storm, on October 7th, and here we have, a week later, the president says, you see October 13th, you know, he orders the government to prepare for space, weather, chaos. So isn't that interesting? We have these accidental, in quotes, coincidental, in quotes, loss of, millions of gallons of gasoline. And now we realize it's actually being siphoned off by the local state National Guard because the federal government won't share their fuel reserves. So they're making their own fuel reserves and topping them off. And I warned people, that there was going to be a meteor storm coming. And sure enough, 1 week later, the president admits it, that the government needs to prepare for space, weather, chaos. I just thought I would bring this, fuel disruption that they are, lying about, blaming it, on accidents, when in fact it's the exact same company and the exact same state, and that's like the same person being struck by lightning twice in 7 weeks. It's a statistical impossibility. This has been Brother Bart's Conspiracy Corner News, episode 45. I think you should prepare physically for these events to come, but don't forget to prepare your soul for eternity. Please tell your friends. Share the link, give me a YouTube thumbs up if you like this video, and be sure to read the full Sleuth Journal article on this topic, which will be linked in the description of this video, as well as these articles. And most of all, thank you for your kind and generous support. Very, very unusual. And as most people subscribing to this and like channels will know, that the mainstream media is in bed with the government and other corrupt officials, and they carry the narrative that they are told to carry. Well, here's the story viewed, and because it had happened yesterday rather than today, the story was thrown away. So it's very odd that a story like this would be reported locally 4 days after it happened, and nationally 7 days after it happened. Reported news events throughout the world, focusing on special preparation for the difficult times ahead for all mankind. You may remember this story if you follow alternate news, and I think it might have been reported in the mainstream media, though, about a Greetings, friends and countrymen. Welcome to Conspiracy Corner News, episode 45. This is Bart Sibrel. Conspiracy Corner News briefly highlights the week's most significant and under a week after it happened, which is very unusual because when I was in news for 2 years, I submitted a story that was 1 day old. It was about a particular well-known journalist coming to town who I interviewed.